Hi students, in this lecture we will be focusing on wind and solar energy. In the interest of time, we will not be covering the other types of renewable energy sources as they are, for the most part, either not widely available or commercially viable at this point in time. After reviewing these materials, you should be able to understand the advantages of renewable energy sources, identify which energy sources provide for the most jobs, identify which parts of the country are best suited for wind and solar power, understand how thermal and photovoltaic solar systems operate to produce energy, and describe different types of energy storage. In his 2011 State of the Union speech, President Barack Obama said, "To truly transform our economy, protect our security, and save our planet from the ravages of climate change, we need to ultimately make clean, renewable energy the profitable kind of energy." So tonight I challenge you to join me in setting a new goal. By 2035, 80% of America's electricity will come from clean energy sources. Just a few years ago, this plan would have seemed ludicrous, but increasingly it appears readily achievable. A 2014 report found that U.S. utility-scale solar costs as little as 5.6 cents per kilowatt hour, as compared to gas at 6.1 cents per kilowatt hour and coal at 6.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Wind was best of all at 1.4 cents per kilowatt hour. Analysts in 2010 didn't expect to see these prices for wind and solar until 2020. And renewables don't have the external costs of pollution, health impacts, and price volatility of fossil fuels. Using only those sites where energy facilities are socially, economically, and politically acceptable, there's more than enough renewable energy from the sun, wind, geothermal, biomass, and other sources to meet all our present energy needs. President Obama made another big step for renewables in spring of 2015 when he signed an executive order that the federal government would cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2025 compared to 2008 levels. Doing so will mean increasing government use of renewables to 30%. Because renewable energy costs are now so competitive, the rule is expected to have saved taxpayers $18 billion in avoided energy costs. This rule is expected to further increase employment in this fast-growing sector. As many observers have noted, most renewable energy jobs involve installing and maintaining facilities, so they cannot be outsourced overseas. Federal commitments and incentives make it easier for private companies to jump on the bandwagon. The computer maker Apple spent $850 million to buy a solar farm in 2013 to power its operations. Google has invested in solar energy and reports that it uses 35% renewable power. At the time of President Obama's announcement, over a dozen of the largest federal contractors, such as IBM, General Electric, and Lockheed Martin, announced voluntary cuts on greenhouse gas emissions and efficiency improvements. Renewable energy also has the advantage that it can be planned and deployed relatively quickly. It takes decades to plan and permit a coal, gas, oil, or nuclear power plant. Wind farms and solar collectors, on the other hand, can be developed and permitted in just a few years. Furthermore, these renewable facilities are modular. More turbines or solar panels can be added if loads grow, or the footprint of a facility can be adjusted by removing or rearranging turbines and panels. This figure shows the potential energy available from renewable sources using currently available technology in presently accessible sites. Together, these sources could supply more than 6 times the current world energy use. Wind power is the world's fastest growing energy source. With 370 gigawatts of globally installed capacity in 2014, the Wind Power Energy Association predicts that 1.5 million megawatts of capacity could be possible by 2020. Wind power could replace all the commercial energy we now use if we choose to develop it. China is the world's largest producer of wind turbines and has the second largest installed wind capacity after Europe. Clean technology provides more than 1 million jobs in China, manufacturing equipment for domestic use and for export. China now has over 63 gigawatts of wind power, or about 1/4 of the world total. The United States has a tremendous potential for wind power. Large areas of the Great Plains and mountain states and all coastal states have persistent winds suitable for commercial development. Texas, with over 10 gigawatts, leads the nation in wind power, followed by Iowa, California, Illinois, and Minnesota. Wind power takes about 1/3 as much area and creates about 5 times as many jobs per megawatt as coal when the land consumed by mining is taken into account. When wind power is installed on farmlands, each tower uses only about 0.1 hectare or a quarter acre of cropland. Farmers can cultivate 90% of their land while getting $2,000 or more in annual rent for each wind machine. An even better return results if the landowner builds and operates the wind generator, selling the electricity to the local utility. Annual profits can be as much as $100,000 per turbine, a good addition to farm income. If you include the land required for mining, wind power takes about 1/3 as much area and creates about 5 times as many jobs to create the same amount of electrical energy as coal. Cooperatives are springing up to help landowners and communities finance, build, and operate their own wind generators. 1 gigawatt of wind power, which is equivalent to one large nuclear or fossil fuel plant, can create more than 3,000 permanent jobs, while paying about $4 million in rent to landowners and $3.6 million in tax payments to local governments. About 20 Native American tribes, for example, have formed a coalition to study wind power. Together, their reservations, which are in the windiest, least productive parts of the Great Plains, could generate at least 350 gigawatts of electrical power, equivalent to about half of the current total U.S. installed electrical capacity. In Germany, 47% of all wind and solar installations are owned by community cooperatives, in which members receive a share of the profits and the energy. This financing approach has greatly accelerated Germany's efforts to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels. Energy independence has been a strong motivator for many European adopters of renewable energy. There have been many concerns about bird and bat mortality around wind turbines. These are important questions, especially for early wind installations on California ridgetops where migrating raptors have collided too frequently with turbine blades. On the other hand, coal and oil production is among the main causes of forest destruction and risks to endangered species worldwide. Natural gas developers in the western United States have led the charge to prevent protection of endangered sage grouse and other vulnerable species. Coal mining has eliminated mountaintop habitat for forest songbirds. Reliable numbers are hard to come by, but one estimate is that coal, oil, and gas are responsible for 5 to 10 times as many bird deaths in the United States as wind turbines cause. There have also been concerns about wind turbine noise, which can depend partly on context and on the design of the turbine. Resistance can also decline when local residents own a share in the energy production. Sometimes this is a NIMBY, or not in my backyard problem. We are accustomed to getting coal, oil, and gas from remote places where we cannot see the environmental and social impacts of energy extraction. It's easy not to worry about wars involving oil wealth that happen far away in Iraq or Kuwait. What do you think? Would greater awareness of those issues make you more tolerant of nearby wind power or not? Solar power has always been our ultimate energy source. Solar energy drives winds and the hydrologic cycle, and it has produced all biomass, including fossil fuels and our food. The average amount of solar energy that reaches the Earth's surface is about 10,000 times all of the commercial energy used each year. This amount varies geographically, but solar energy is sufficient for economical production even at high latitudes, as in Northern Europe. Our simplest and oldest use of solar energy is passive heat absorption, using natural materials or absorptive structures with no moving parts to simply gather and hold heat. These are called passive heat systems. For thousands of years, people have built thick-walled stone and adobe dwellings that collect heat during the day and gradually release that heat at night. After cooling at night, these massive buildings materials maintain a comfortable daytime temperature within the house, even as they absorb external warmth. Most modern solar thermal systems make hot water by running a liquid such as water mixed with antifreeze through thin pipes in a glass vacuum tube or in a glass-covered flat panel. The fluid reaches high temperature, often 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It then passes through a heat exchanger, which heats water for direct use for space heating. A panel of about 5 square meters can provide enough hot water for a family. Solar water heaters can be scaled up to provide hot water and space heating for large buildings or for whole towns, like this facility on Aero Island in Denmark. At least 330 gigawatts of thermal energy have been installed globally, more than twice the installed solar photovoltaic capacity. China both produces and uses about 80% of the world's solar thermal systems. The low cost, less than $200 each, makes them common there for household hot water. Over 30 million Chinese homes get hot water and/or space heat from solar energy. Solar thermal systems are very efficient at capturing solar energy, but they are much less common in the United States and Europe than solar photovoltaics. In Europe, municipal solar systems do provide district heating. In 2003, the Bush administration quietly reinstalled solar thermal heaters and photovoltaic panels as originally installed under President Carter, but that were removed by President Reagan. In a symbolic act to illustrate his commitment to solar energy, Barack Obama installed additional photovoltaic panels specifically to provide power to the president's living quarters. So far, the Trump administration has not removed them. Solar thermal systems can produce extremely hot water, enough to make steam and run a turbine in a concentrating solar power system. CSP often uses long, trough-shaped parabolic mirrors to reflect and concentrate sunlight on a central tube containing a heat-absorbing fluid, as we see in this photograph. Reaching extremely high temperatures, the fluid passes through a heat exchanger where it heats water and generates steam. The steam then turns a turbine to produce electricity. Heat from the transfer fluid can also be stored in a medium, such as molten salt, for later use. This allows the system to continue to generate electricity even on cloudy nights or at night, cloudy days or at night. Another approach is to arrange thousands of mirrors in concentric rings around a tall central tower, as is shown in this photograph. Driven by electric motors, the mirrors track the sun and focus light on a heat absorber at the top of the quote-unquote power tower, where a transfer medium is heated to temperatures as high as 500 degrees centigrade or 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This heat is used to turn water to steam, which drives an electric generator. Under optimum conditions, a 50-hectare or 130-acre mirror array should be able to generate 100 megawatts of clean, renewable power. CSP is also attractive to energy utilities. Because installations are large, often hundreds of megawatts, CSP is a way to produce solar energy on a scale that makes economic sense to investors. Acquiring land and permits is slow and expensive, but it's not necessarily harder than putting solar panels on millions of individual roofs with separate contracts to negotiate for each one. CSP plants can be controversial. Although they help free us from fossil fuels, they occupy desert land that can be easily scarred and slow to recover. CSP proposals sometimes threaten rare or endangered species such as the desert tortoise, whose habitat is already reduced by development in the desert. In 2010, California regulators approved 13 large solar thermal facilities in the Mojave Desert. Most were eventually canceled or delayed by disputes over land. Native American groups protested over threats to sacred cultural sites, and others objected to industrial activities. In the pristine landscape, in response to these debates, millions of hectares of deserts have been added to protected areas to forestall energy development. Despite these challenges, CSP plants offer an important contribution to our energy future. According to the Renewable Energy Policy Network, there are now over 3.4 gigawatts of installed capacity in the United States. The United States and Spain are leading users. The largest plant in the world, which opened in 2014, is California's Ivanpah Solar Power Facility with a capacity of 377 megawatts. When solar energy strikes a photovoltaic or PV cell, an electron is dislodged from atoms in the P layer in the silicon crystal. These electrons cross an electrostatic junction between different semiconductor materials, and this creates a surplus of electrons in the N layer and a shortage of electrons in the P layer. And this difference in charge creates an electron flow or current in a circuit connecting the two layers. Photovoltaic or PV cells capture solar energy and convert it directly to electrical current by separating electrons from their parent atoms and accelerating them across a one-way electrostatic barrier formed by the junction between two different types of semiconductor materials as shown in this figure. The first photovoltaic cells were made by slicing thin wafers of giant crystals of extremely pure silicon. Over the past 25 years, the efficiency of energy captured by photovoltaic cells has increased from less than 1% of incident light to more than 10% under field conditions and over 75% in the laboratory. Global installed PV capacity is now 140 gigawatts of installed capacity. Installation is increasing worldwide, although China has been expanding most rapidly. Utility-scale solar PV installations are becoming widespread. Among the largest installations are two 550-megawatt solar PV stations in Southern California, the Desert Sunlight Solar Farm and the Topaz Solar Farm. Solar PV has seen dramatic improvements in efficiency. New types of photovoltaic cells are in development, including flexible kinds that could go on curved surfaces or attached to car rooftops. Thin, transparent films that could go on windows are even being explored. And by some estimates, the United States could generate about 3/4 of its present electrical consumption with rooftop photovoltaics, especially in roofs of warehouses and big box retail stores. A photovoltaic array of about 30 to 40 square meters will generate enough electricity for an efficient house. A variety of incentive structures can encourage rooftop systems. One of the most successful in Germany, which now has over 40 gigawatts of installed solar, has been feed-in tariffs. These are set prices subsidized by the government that a utility must pay for excess power purchased from homeowners. Another approach is to have utility-owned panels. Building owners sign an agreement with the utility that owns and maintains the panels, and owners agree to purchase electricity at a given rate for a certain number of years from the utility. But all the energy from the panel goes directly to the grid. Because solar is about the same cost as other electricity these days, and because it seems a safe bet that fossil fuels will get more expensive over time, that agreement can make good economic sense. Homeowners also have the satisfaction of knowing that they are contributing to carbon-free energy production. Solar voltaic energy is highly versatile and can be used in a variety of dispersed settings. In this photograph, we see A, utility-scale PV arrays that can provide base load power, B, the middle one that shows thin film PV collectors that can be printed on flexible backing and used like ordinary roof tiles, and C, millions of square meters of rooftops on schools and commercial buildings that can be fitted with solar panels. In this photograph, workers are installing PV systems on a Walmart superstore. A typical Walmart has a power bill of approximately $500,000 per year, of which about half of that covers the cost of air conditioning. Installing PV systems helps reduce energy costs and represents a significant savings. The solar industry employs just under 374,000 people, while coal, gas, and oil power generation combined had a workforce of slightly more than 187,000. Unfortunately for President Trump, the numbers simply do not bear out his claims that new jobs are happening in the coal industry. The truth is, 1 out of every 50 new jobs created in the United States last year was in the solar industry. For a little perspective, 8 times more Americans work at Home Depot than work in the coal industry. The market for energy storage on the power grid is growing at a rapid clip, driven by declining prices and supportive government policies. Energy storage in this context simply means saving electricity for later use. It's like having a bunch of rechargeable batteries, but much larger than the ones in your cell phone and probably connected to the grid. One of the problems that we see when we talk about renewable energy is the fact that you don't have energy in a wind system when the wind doesn't blow, or you don't have energy from a PV system when the sun doesn't shine. So being able to store electricity when you create an excess of power with a renewable energy system is a great advantage. After annual average growth of about 50% for the last 5 years, the U.S. electrical industry installed about 1 gigawatt hour of new storage capacity between 2013 and 2017, according to the firm GTM Research. That's enough power for 16 million laptops for several hours. While this amount of storage is less than about 0.2% of the average amount of electricity the U.S. consumes, analysts predict that installations will double between 2017 and 18, and then keep expanding rapidly in the U.S. and around the world. After being generated at power plants, electricity usually travels down power lines at the speed of light, and most of it is consumed immediately. Without the means to store electricity, utilities have to produce just enough to meet demand around the clock, including peak hours. That makes electricity different from most industries. Just imagine what would happen if automakers had to do that. The moment you bought a car, a worker would have to drive it out of the factory gate. Assembly lines would consistently have to speed up and slow down based on consumer whims. It sounds maddening and ridiculous, right? But electrical grid operators basically pull this off every day, balancing supply and demand every few seconds by turning power plants on and off. That's why a storage boom would make a huge difference. Storage creates the equivalent of a warehouse to store electricity when it's plentiful for other times when it's needed. The grid currently has very little storage for the same reason that only about 200,000 of the 17.2 million vehicles that Americans drive were electric. It's expensive today. Electric vehicles do not yet save money for most U.S. drivers, but market experts project that electrical vehicle ownership will cost less than standard vehicles powered by gasoline within a decade and continue to get cheaper after that. Likewise, for the energy grid, if storage gets cheap enough, its potential market could expand from 1 gigawatt hour to dozens or even hundreds of gigawatt hours. If or when that happens, wind and solar power would become more competitive, increasingly displacing both coal and natural gas, now the nation's 2 top sources of electric power. And the cheaper storage would also make electric vehicles more affordable, reducing the amount of gasoline and diesel Americans consume. The electricity and automotive industries operate nearly the same way they did 50 years ago, but a world of low-cost batteries would change them both in exciting and unprecedented ways.